From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Donald Trump imposes tariffs of 25% on all goods from Canada and Mexico on Saturday, effective Tuesday, he said. Canada announced a retaliation, but then Mexico and the United States on Monday cut a deal where they say the U.S. is postponing the tariffs for a month pending more negotiation and a concession on the part of Mexico that we'll talk about. So what's the importance of Trump's actions and how economically significant are they, and what happens next? That's our subject for today on Potomac Watch. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the Wall Street Journal Opinion pages. This is our daily podcast, and I'm here with Mary Anastasia O'Grady and Alicia Finley. So, Mary, why do you think Trump did this? 25% on two allies with whom we have a treaty agreement, the USMCA, that Donald Trump himself signed after his negotiator put it together. But the tariffs of only 10% on China, a genuine adversary. What's Trump's calculation here?
So he was trying to get attention, to show his power, to show his commitment to tariffs as a way to raise revenue, to show that he thinks America is being ripped off by the rest of the world, to show his trade theory, what he believes about trade, and to show that he's going to be tough on migration and fentanyl. That's why he did it.
Okay, so political justification. In other words, what you seem to be saying is he almost had to do it, given the fact that he threatened it so often. He almost had to show he'd do it.
I think that's a good point. A lot of people I talked to said he would never do it because the cost, not just to our neighbors who will go into recession if we do it, so it'll make them poorer and more desperate to get into the United States, but also to Americans, to consumers and workers. And so he knows that those costs are high, but if he keeps threatening it and never does it, the threat goes away. So he had to try to make good on it on Saturday.
Okay, so we know he's cut a deal on Monday with Mexico we'll get to, but let's listen to Trump defend the tariffs against Canada, and then followed up by Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, announcing retaliation.
Canada's been very abusive of the United States for many years. They don't allow our banks. Did you know that? Canada does not allow banks to go in. If you think about it, that's pretty amazing. If we have a U.S. bank, they don't allow them to go in. Canada's been very tough on oil, on energy. They don't allow our farm products in, essentially. They don't allow a lot of things in, and we allow everything to come in. It's been a one-way street. We subsidize Canada by the tune of about $200 billion a year. And for what? What do we get out of it? We don't get anything out of it. I love the people of Canada. I disagree with the leadership of Canada. And something's going to happen there. But if they want to play the game, I don't mind. We can play the game all they want.
I am announcing Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 1 day's time to allow Canadian companies and supply chains to seek to find alternatives. And as part of our response, we are considering, with the provinces and territories, several non-tariff measures, including some relating to critical minerals, energy, procurement, and other partnerships.
So as we are now discussing this, there has not been a last-minute deal between Canada and the U.S., although there is a reporting of a phone call that Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump will have, and maybe there will be some kind of delay there. But for the purposes of this discussion, Alicia, what do you make of Trump's justification for the tariffs, particularly this idea that there's a $200 billion subsidy that the U.S. gives to Canada? I think he's referring to the trade deficit.
Right. That's what it sounds like. The trade deficit, by the way, is there's only a trade deficit because Canada exports more oil to the U.S. than vice versa.
It's all energy.
It's all energy and also hydropower, by the way. But that's largely because the Canadian oil is well suited for U.S. refiners down on the Gulf Coast, but also in the Midwest. So it's a particularly efficient means of essentially producing our own oil at home. We are a net exporter of oil, by the way, when you consider refined products. So that's actually kind of misleading to say that we have a $200 billion deficit. But what's also strange is he does not cite that in his actual executive order, the trade deficit or any of that. He hangs his order under national emergency declaring fentanyl, drug overdoses as the pretext, or I would say it's the pretext. And he says that Canada just hasn't done enough to help us get the drug cartels under control. And there's increasing amount of fentanyl coming across the Canadian border with the U.S. and they need to do more. Again, I think this is pretextual because if you listen to his comments earlier and for the last several weeks, he's been complaining that we import too much Canadian goods, autos, lumber, whatnot. And this seems to be trying to set up a renegotiation of the USMCA.
Yeah, Mary, he keeps saying that we don't need anything Canada sells us. We don't need their lumber. We don't need their energy. We don't need anything. We can do it all here. But of course, the integrated trade between the two countries is extensive. And in fact, the one startling figure is that, and this is involving all three countries, but that auto manufacturer goes back across borders on average 6 times for each vehicle, which is amazing when you think about it, because the automakers are trying to be most efficient as possible in the components and the cost of those components that they add to the vehicle.
It's a little bit amusing. I mean, if it weren't so tragic, that he's basically saying markets don't know what they're doing. Markets shouldn't be doing this. I can tell you how to do this. This is the way it should work. And the U.S. would be richer if only all the purchases of what we need come from inside the U.S. There's a reason why when you have options to buy from Canada or buy from Mexico, capital is allocated to those two markets in some cases, and it stays at home in some cases. And that's because capital is allocated to its highest use when it's free to do so. So it's kind of a ridiculous, I mean, it's autarky at the end, right? Where you say, you know, any country could say, well, we can be self-sufficient in everything and we're going to close up our borders. But, you know, we know from economic history and everything we've experienced in this country that by engaging with markets that have comparative advantages in some aspects of what it takes to produce, you create more wealth for Americans. You know, this is really a show of power on the part of Donald Trump to illustrate that he can do whatever he wants to our two neighbors, and they don't have much choice but to accept it. And I think it's not a good look for America.
Well, yeah, and it's caused something of a nationalist backlash in Canada, which is very interesting. All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about President Trump's deal with Mexico to put the tariffs off for a month when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Paul Gigot here on the Daily Potomac Watch podcast with my colleagues Mary O'Grady and Alicia Finley. Let's address the deal that appears to have been struck between Trump and Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico. Sheinbaum said on the weekend Mexico would retaliate, but she didn't offer any specific details or timing. So on Monday morning, then, she issued a statement that said, "We had a good conversation with President Trump with great respect for our relationship and sovereignty. We reached a series of agreements. One, Mexico will immediately reinforce the northern border with 10,000 members of the National Guard to prevent drug trafficking from Mexico to the U.S., particularly fentanyl. Two, the U.S. is committed to working to prevent the trafficking of high-powered weapons to Mexico. And three, our teams will begin working today on 2 fronts, security and trade. Fourth, they are pausing tariffs for 1 month from now." So, Alicia, who blinked?
Well, I'd say Donald Trump did. There doesn't seem to be any more concessions from Mexico, maybe the 10,000 National Guards, though we don't really know how many they were already deploying. Mexico had already essentially agreed to Trump's demands to reinstate the Remain in Mexico, so to hold migrants, and it was already doing a lot on its southern border to prevent those coming up from Venezuela and Central American countries. And so it seems like maybe Trump got spooked by the market reaction, or maybe he intended to pull back all along and just was looking for some kind of cover and say, hey, I got something out of Mexico. Now we're going to negotiate some other kinds of trade concessions, because I really do think that this is fundamentally, at least partly, about his concern about that there's a trade deficit and where Mexico is importing too many things. So I think that this is still preliminary or an attempt to tee up a renegotiation of the USMCA.
This is a crucial point, Mary, that Alicia's making. And the question really is Donald Trump's use of tariffs merely transactional? bet is he views it as a tool of diplomacy and economic, political diplomacy to get some concession from trading partners. And then he backs off. Or does Trump believe that tariffs are virtuous in and of themselves, that they are economically beneficial? And his goal, longer-term goal, is to actually renegotiate the USMCA, but more broadly, actually impose a tariff regime on foreign goods that will drive much more production back to the U.S. from abroad, because it won't be as economical to grow avocados in Mexico, for example, if you slap on a big tariff on avocados. The startling figure that you came up with, Mary, 90% of American avocados are grown in Mexico. So I guess Donald Trump is practicing avocado nationalism. He wants them grown
California, Florida.
California. If you could find the workers and the water to be able to grow them there. I don't know. I mean, my own view is the markets have said, okay, well, he's just transactional, right, Mary? You know, Larry Kudlow, Steve Moore, and a couple of the advisors to Trump have suggested most of the time that that's what Trump is all about. He's just transactional. I don't know. I've had enough conversation with Donald Trump to believe that he is a true believer of tariffs, and he really does want to leave office with a much broader set of tariffs against goods from around the world, from friends and adversaries. What do you think?
Well, I think his movements right out of the box here are mostly about power. He's trying to assert American power everywhere in the world. If you don't get on sides with us, we're going to hit you in one way or the other. So there's a large component of that there. I mean, in this case with Sheinbaum, he could have done this agreement last week. He didn't have to do this whole drama over the weekend, but he wanted a big drama, and he wanted to be able to say, I declare victory. That's very important to him, to keep the control of this. It's what is really an imperial presidency so far.
Well, but Mary, let me ask you this. Okay, he hasn't declared victory as we are talking now, but I assume he will with Sheinbaum. But is that declaration warranted, or do you agree with Alicia that, in fact, Trump is blinking here?
No, I think he's declaring victory, but he really hasn't done anything.
So he's backing down.
He's backing down for now. This is the next 4 years for us, Paul. It's going to be do as I say right now, or we're going to hit you. And then when he sees that the cost is higher than the rewards, he's going to have some narrative that where he's going to be able to say, see, I won. In this case, I mean, I'm already getting emails from Trump supporters saying to me, see, you don't understand how negotiation works. He won. See? So that's sort of how he plays it. Now, I think the bigger thing that we need to worry about is the renegotiation of USMCA, because the last time he did the renegotiation of NAFTA, he didn't change very much, but he changed some things. He forced a greater component of North American steel and aluminum. A greater portion of a product has to be made in the United States in the case of the vehicles. So he will continue to try to increase that, inching it up slowly, because he does believe that, a lot of Midwestern jobs were lost because of NAFTA and then USMCA. And he wants to try to increase more the share of the U.S. manufacturing in the automotive industry through USMCA. He'll go right up to the line as close as he can to make that a bigger number.
So there's going to be a lot more uncertainty here on the tariffs going forward.
Oh, for sure. That's a terrible part of this.
Yeah, I very much agree with that.